It's Diana House here, and we are here with Craig Hunter, the CEO of Bitmaker Labs.
How's it going?
Good, Craig, welcome.
Thank you.
So you have referred to yourself before as a well-dressed nerd, and that a well-dressed nerd is a dangerous thing.
Yep.
Where did this come from?
I think it's an interesting combo, a rare combo in the tech world that I work in, and so you come off as seeming non-technical, and if you're technical as well, it's kind of a good combo.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, I like that. Yeah. So a few years ago, when I had first met you, you were working and you were kind of doing sales at a local web developer firm.
Yep.
It seems like from there to now, you've had this really crazy journey. And it all started with a Valentine's Day at a movie theater with a bro date. So kind of, if you could tell our viewers about what happened that Valentine's Day.
Yeah, sure. It was Valentine's Day, 2012 or 2011? I can't remember. And was at a movie theater and basically got an email from someone at Uber who then became a close friend of mine, but basically had reached out after I had a Twitter interaction with him saying, hey, really random and last minute, but you look pretty interesting and we're downtown Toronto right now having drinks, and would you be willing to swing by the Thompson Hotel to meet? And the movie theater I was at was actually in London, Ontario here. And so stepped out of the theater, was like, wow, crazy. At the time, Uber was a pretty small, tiny company, but it was one of my top picks that I really wanted to go work for. And so stepped out of the theater, called the guy that had emailed me, who I'd never met before. And he was like, wow, you got my message. It was super last minute and random that we called you. Can you meet? I said, potentially, but I'm actually 2.5 hours away in London, Ontario. And he's like, oh, shoot, that sucks. Maybe next time. Our vice president of operations, employee number 2 at Uber, is in town, but he's got a red eye tomorrow. And so he's like, probably won't work. He's like, well, how long are you guys going to be there for drinks? He basically said, oh, we'll be here for a while. And I said, I'll see you in 2 hours. And basically hung up the phone, drove straight to Toronto, met and had breakfast with who was Ryan Graves, who was the VP of operations at Uber and the original CEO, and kind of got basically a job offer on the spot. I had to do a couple tests, but...
What kind of tests?
They have a creative test and an analytics test at Uber to sort of put you into what, the roles are a little bit different now, but an operations role that's kind of logistics and analytics heavy, and a marketing role. And there was a potential that I'd have a sort of pseudo blend of both roles, depending on sort of how I assessed. And basically 5 days later was leaving London, Ontario. I'd helped hire a replacement at the agency I was working at, and moved to Toronto, helped with the launch of Toronto for Uber here, and was here for the launch dinner and got to meet Travis and Ryan and the whole team. Then went off to San Francisco for some training, on to Vancouver a few weeks later, and sort of didn't know many people in Vancouver at the time, had never been there before in my life, sort of with just a couple bags, and got an office space, was joined by a couple team members, a couple weeks later, and got to work, kind of. Okay,
so this is a crazy story. Let me just back up a little bit.
Sure.
So, put me in that frame of mind that you were in, that Valentine's Day, or, not maybe that day, but around that time period. Were you kind of seeking out employment with Uber? Like, what were the interactions that you were having, with that person? Because some people might be watching this being like, okay, wow, like, I have a company that I would, love to work at.
Right.
Like, how did you go about doing this? Like, walk me through the steps.
So maybe I'm more of a stalker than letting on. So, at the time, I felt like I'd kind of hit that peak that you hit in a company where you're not learning much more, and the next move for me was either starting my own entrepreneurial endeavor, I think, or joining a company that I thought was a super fast growing company. Being in London, I felt like starting a company, I'd taken a program at Ivy and sort of was just seeking out other people in the entrepreneurial space, and I was big on not starting a company for the sake of starting a company. I wanted to have an idea that sort of grabbed me, that you have to work on, and I didn't have that yet. And so for me, joining a company that I thought could become a global phenomenon was the move. And I basically narrowed it down to, at the time, Uber or Square, because I was non-technical. I knew I had plenty of hustle and passion, and would work harder than anyone else I knew. And so I those were companies where I felt like I could have a higher impact, because
I love that.
yeah, it was like there's a logistics piece, there's very much an operations piece to Uber, where it's not just an app, it's a, you know, onboarding drivers, getting customers is kind of the core business for them.
Right. And how did you kind of come to that Uber and Square? Was it like reading TechCrunch, or like, you know, how did you even kind of really get so clear on that?
Sure. So I used to skip a lot of class at Western and sit in the library and read every venture capitalist blog, TechCrunch, you know, GigaOM, Pando Daily, you name it, I would read it and consume.
You're doing your own education.
Yeah, consuming an insane amount of, you know, YouTube content of any founder I could find that I thought was interesting, any investor I could find, and just sort of trying to understand other people's, you know, perspectives and the way they look at things. And I think that started to inform my own decisions. And so every time I'd see a fundraise happen on TechCrunch, I wasn't really just reading what everyone is like, oh, you know, huge success, they raised $10 million. It's like, why did they raise money? You know, how big do I think this company could be? What's the total market value for something? And starting to think about some of, you know, I didn't even go to school for business, but sort of trying to, get my own business education. And so, you know, I had been following Uber very closely, even though it was super early days. They were only in a handful of cities, and not many people knew about them at the time. But I saw they'd created a Twitter account for Uber Toronto, and I thought that was crazy that out of all the cities in the world that you could end up launching, that Toronto was clearly on their roadmap. And I didn't know if it was just a placeholder and they're just grabbing it. And so I was interacting with that account directly. And so obviously I was watching them closely, so that sort of self-selected me as someone who's clearly interested in the company.
Oh, cool.
And so that helped.
So you were very focused. Like, were you doing that with the Square? Like, were you
I was doing that with Square as well, and they seem to be moving slower into Canada, although now they've launched in Waterloo and they're launching a Toronto office, which is cool. But out of the two companies too, I'd say Uber was clearly more operationally heavy than Square. I knew less about finance than I knew about, you know, just pure hustle and marketing and sort of, you know, the space that they were operating in. Regulations, I had a bit of a background in politics too, which helped. So at the time when, you know, the Valentine thing happened, which seems crazy, I kind of, what would have seemed like a crazy risk to a lot of people, to be like, take a job offer on no notice, drop your job that was a good paying job here, and move, you know, 3,000 kilometers across the country, was not a no-brainer for me, but a pretty easy decision, because I was so excited about it and I'd already sort of imagined myself there, and sort of just made it happen, I guess. But definitely luck played into it, and I feel very fortunate.
So how long were you at Uber for?
Just over 2 years.
Okay, and what would you say were like your biggest learnings for, you know, being so early in like such a disruptive kind of crazy organization that now everyone's going like, you're a genius for picking that? And, you know, I also kind of partly say genius because, you know, part of your employment contract allowed you to get some stock, which sounds like it will likely be a pretty good decision, you know, when you look back at this time period. Yeah,
no regrets. I remember originally negotiating salary versus stock options.
I remember having a conversation with you about this actually years ago.
I just maxed out stock options as much as I could, and thank God I did. But sorry, what was the question?
Yeah, so the question, what were your biggest learnings, you know, beyond just the, you know, going forward and taking a risk and starting to work at the company? Like, what did you learn at Uber that you've kind of taken with you in your next venture, which we'll talk about after?
Sure. So I think at Uber I was exposed to like every facet of the business outside of, you know, founding the company.
What employee number were you?
52.
Oh, so you were very early.
Yeah. And so each new city that the company launched, they gave the people running that city a ton of autonomy. Each city ran originally usually with 2 people, and then there'd be a sort of a third person who would come in to manage it. But the cities I was exposed to were really tiny teams, and so everyone did a ton of heavy lifting, and you had to work very closely with at least one other person who, you know, some of my closest friends in the world now are the guys that I work with in Toronto and Vancouver. And it exposed you in a very fast-paced environment to everything from, you know, operations to, you know, watching the P&L and the financials of the operation in a city.
So did you kind of run it as an entrepreneur and like very much kind of?
Yeah, every city, I mean, every role at Uber I'd say is super entrepreneurial. It's a little bit less that now because it's a much bigger company, but even though they've got, I would imagine 3,000 plus employees, they're in something like 275 cities, so they're spread out quite a bit, and so every team operates as its own startup, I would say, and they very much are given that sort of, you know, you get to, you know, celebrate your own successes, but you also are responsible for any, you know, failures in your city too, and you're expected to learn from them and sort of refocus from there. But so I was exposed to every part of the business, from like burn rates to, you know, promotions, marketing, getting influencers, launch events, one-on-ones, things that don't scale, you know, spending time with users and understanding what they like and don't like about the service.
So it sounds like such an amazing experience. Why did you kind of feel like your time was done? It was time to leave.
Yeah, I think one of the benefits of owning stock in a crazy successful company like Uber, stock options at the time, all the sort of future upside for me was in that stock versus like a salary, and I, you know, realized about myself that I really enjoyed the early days of Uber when it was 50 people versus, you know, the multi-thousand person company that it had become. And not in a bad way, a lot of my best friends still work there, but I was looking for something with more seniority, to sort of stretch my wings and start all over again at a new company. And so bought up my stock options, took a vacation, and then went on to the next thing.
Yeah, so how did that transition go? Did you have a plan when you left, or did you leave and then decide, okay, I got to figure out a plan?
Less of a plan. I knew I had lots of options. I mean, working for a company like Uber kind of connects you to a ton of people and a ton of cities. I was fortunate enough to travel a lot in the States, make lots of connections with people in Europe and Asia and all kinds of places because there's a big family.
So you knew you were going to be able to figure it out? And
yeah, like if you think there's a PayPal mafia where a PayPal exited for $1 billion with I don't know how many employees, let's say 1,000. You know, Uber's already several times bigger than that, and the crazy thing about Uber is it's in 275 cities around the world. So you have a network that's sort of spread out, and I didn't worry about where I'd end up. I just was very selective on a few things that needed to a few boxes that needed to be checked, to make sure that I was like super happy in whatever I was doing next.
And you probably like needed a break as well. I think I saw you kind of in that transition, and you were like, I need to start working out, and I need to sleep.
It's kind of working in that environment is like, you know, I think my dad always says in 2 years you did 10 years. It's kind of just a very accelerated pace and a ton of responsibility, which is great, but after that it's kind of nice to have a reset. And you come back feeling extremely refreshed and back to sort of ready to hustle again. I got antsy for a bit where I was like, okay, I need to sink my teeth into
where
something.
Where is this next thing coming from?
Exactly.
And so what did happen next?
Spent a bunch of time. I went to Vancouver, a bunch of time in Toronto where I was at the time, a bunch of time in San Francisco. Was
just kind of floating and searching,
hanging out with friends, you know, talking to people that I knew were starting new companies, you know, seeing if they're a good fit. Was fortunate to get a really cool job offer in the U.S. in San Fran, but because I dropped out 2 credits shy of my degree at Western, I couldn't get it, or I would have had a hard time getting a visa, and I would have been in a limbo situation where I had a little sister who was getting married that summer, who you know, and I knew I wanted to cross the border, and I didn't want to get in some weird scenario.
So it's pretty much your sister's fault.
I blame her because that company's gone on to be very successful. But for me, it was like long-term vesting stock and maybe getting denied entry into the U.S. for some weird reason wasn't worth it. And the guy who had started that company was a good friend of mine, and I actually helped them find someone to replace me, and decided that, you know what, I think I'm very passionate about Canadian technology, and I really wanted to work for a Canadian tech company, and it was between Vancouver and Toronto, and ultimately found my next opportunity where I'm at now.
Great, so what are you doing now?
So now I'm the CEO of Bitmaker Labs.
Cool, and so what does Bitmaker Labs do?
Bitmaker Labs is Canada's largest tech skills accelerator. So we basically train anyone with potentially no knowledge to become a junior developer, designer, marketer for the tech industry within 9 to 12 weeks. And basically 92% of our full-time graduates end up within a career in the technology industry within 3 months of
That's
graduating.
crazy. And so why are you so excited about, you know, this particular venture, and what has the journey been like so far?
Yeah, I think I saw at Uber, and, you know, just being a member of the Canadian tech scene too, if you see the successes at like Hootsuite or Shopify or Chango or FreshBooks, these companies are exploding, and not for lack of funding, but they can't find technical people usually to fill roles that they desperately need. The same problems happen in Silicon Valley too, with like a company like Uber. You know, a lot of these companies have plenty of money to spend, but the people just don't exist for development roles, for design roles, for you know, specific digital marketing roles like online advertising and, you know, growth hacking or whatever you want to call it. But and so training people with those skills is like super helpful.
People are always looking for, you know, the technical person. It seems like it's such a challenge, and you guys have, you know, such a big, you know, problem that you're trying to solve.
Yeah, I mean, coming out of Uber, which, I would argue is solving, the overall transportation problem. But, if you look at the taxi markets locally in a lot of places, it's not massive, and the company's grown to be huge. I don't know where Bitmaker will end up, but the education market is like an order of magnitude bigger market. It's one of the largest industries in the world, and it's kind of broken right now. And so anything we can do to fix it is like, you're solving a huge problem, and there's a lot of room to sort of work with.
Right, and there's so many people who have like no idea what to do with their lives, and maybe have a degree or a university degree or college degree, and they still like, it doesn't give them much, right?
Yeah, I can count a long list of friends of mine that went to Western with me and did extremely well in school, but are still doing the same thing they did before they went to university.
Right.
That's kind of frustrating to see. You spent a ton of money and 4 years of your life, which is a long time in the tech world, and you don't have a clear path.
Right. What's the transition been like from like employee to like the boss?
Interesting. It's definitely a learning curve for sure. I think I was exposed to some stuff that sort of ran parallel from Uber, because even though we were operating small teams, you had a ton of autonomy, a ton of responsibility, a very high expectation of sort of work ethic, and everything from hours to efficiency to all kinds of things like that. And so I brought a lot of learnings from Uber, and sort of I think I had the right work ethic, but managing people similar age to you, some older than you, is definitely been an interesting challenge. But I think our team likes me pretty well, and sort of brought some fun into it as well. And I think the big piece that I brought to Bitmaker is sort of a much bigger vision for what it could become. Opening up opportunities with the tech industry through connections that I've got, and launching new sort of offerings.
What is your vision for the future?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to be, the world's #1 source for tech talent.
Wow.
We're in Toronto, which I'd say is one of the best education markets in the world. And we're looking to launch more locations very soon.
Wow, that's a big vision.
Yeah.
It's very exciting. So why do you think you're so drawn to startups? And it's a crazy world to be in. It's not easy.
No. It's a roller coaster.
Yeah, why do you think you're so drawn to the roller coaster? Like, what did you want to be when you were a kid?
I don't even know. I don't think I really knew. I think I struggled for a long time. I would say I'm even probably a late bloomer. I mean, I ultimately pulled out of university 2 credits shy of my degree, because at the time I had a degree in political science and it didn't mean much to me. I had even worked in politics more than most people get a chance to, and decided it wasn't for me. I think I like a ton of variety, and ultimately the things that excite me, in politics, I worked in campaign politics, which was interesting to me, but once the campaign won or lost, the next step wasn't very interesting to me. It was kind of like, okay, it's like a focused effort for something, a result, and the ongoing piece wasn't as interesting to me. And so I don't know. I like the idea of like a small group of people making like an outsized impact in the world, and that's probably why I like working with smaller teams. And we're growing like crazy, and we won't be a small team much longer, but still making an outsized dent is still interesting. So whether we're 22 people right now, and we're going to about 100 this year.
Wow, that's massive growth.
Yeah, and just in Toronto, and other cities we launch will just add to that number. But I think those 100 people could make a massive dent in Toronto, in Ontario, in Canada, and ultimately, hopefully, the world once we launch other countries. And so that's exciting to me.
So as, both an entrepreneur as well as an employee of, entrepreneurs of these fast growing companies, like what, in your opinion, does it take to succeed?
I think people talk a lot about hustle in the tech industry, but I think of it as like tenacity. You need to be willing to get kind of punched in the face and get back up after it. If you can't handle that, you're probably not going to make it.
Right.
And you can call that embracing
failure. Would you say for employees as well, or more kind of for the entrepreneur leading the boat?
I mean, I think it's an emotional roller coaster, and I encourage employees to try crazy things or come up with crazy ideas and try them. But if you tried something and it failed, you might either feel like a huge failure or pick yourself back up and be like, okay, that didn't work. Let's try something different. Let's never do that again the same way, but maybe put a different spin on it or scrap it all together. And then if it does work, you get to own it, and that's the best feeling in the world, and those make up for all the failures you sort of made up until that point.
What kind of employees do you think you attract at Bitmaker Labs? Is the culture similar to an Uber culture?
Yeah, it's definitely a performance culture, I'd say. We have purposely a smaller team than we probably could have. We could have a much larger team. And we have high expectations of employees, but everyone's sort of motivated by the same vision and sort of the the wins that we're creating, when you see someone who only has high school education comes to our program and ends up at a Shopify, that's a super fulfilling thing to play a part in, and that kind of motivates them to put in long hours, spend weekends in the office, go to conferences, work hard at trade shows, always be sort of selling the programs and the vision. But when you like what you do, it doesn't seem like work, as cheesy as that sounds.
Is there a reward culture kind of built in whether formal or kind of informal? Is it more kind of people who are so internally driven, or is there something else kind of that really gets them pushing above and beyond?
I think it's that piece of placing people into careers is probably the biggest reward we give.
Really?
And then we also do a lot of team stuff together, sort of set stretch goals, and when we reach them, we do really cool stuff.
Cool. I'm always really interested in the habits and routines of really successful people and entrepreneurs. So do you have kind of any whether it's a morning routine or kind of just daily habits that as an entrepreneur you take on?
Yeah, I would say the gym is kind of my sanctuary. If I didn't go to the gym, I'd probably be super antsy or anxious. It's like the best stress relief for me ever, and it always has been. I work better on sort of a routine, but it's very difficult to keep a routine, I'm finding. And so I probably could have a much better work-life balance, but I genuinely like what I do, that it doesn't really bother me.
And do you do any personal development, or do you have any formal coaches or mentors?
Tons of mentors, no formal coaches, but tons of friends of mine who run much larger companies than I do that I'm fortunate to know and spend a lot of time with me. Some of them younger than me, some of them older than me, and sort of just, I think having friends like that, you're able to share a lot of the problems you're going through. Big vision stuff doesn't seem as crazy to them as it does to someone who's maybe not in our space. And so I try and hang around people with sort of similar outlooks and people that challenge me and people that I think are much smarter than I am.
Cool. The last thing I'm going to ask you is, if you had one piece of wisdom that you'd want to pass on to entrepreneurs, whether they're in the startup or, scale-up phase, what would kind of that one most impactful piece of wisdom be?
Yeah, I think it probably revolves around just being generally helpful, which sounds super simple, but I think I heard this from Chris Sacca first, but it's basically deliver value before you ask for value back. So when you're in our space, there's a lot of people that are really focused on their own thing, and everyone's trying to create the next billion-dollar company. And so getting their attention can be really tough, but if you find that you're in the community as a helpful person and sort of doing things for them just because you like what they're working on, or opening a door for someone, or creating an opportunity for someone, or just making an introduction, it can be really interesting to see how that comes around. Maybe not immediately, but later down the line in your career. And it's not as selfishly motivated as it might sound, but I think it's just a good mantra to live by in the tech space. It's a reason why Silicon Valley is super successful. I saw a lot of it when I spent time in San Francisco at Uber, and Toronto's starting to get it more, and sort of the Canadian scene. I've seen it in Vancouver as well, where you're seeing it more and more. But just being generally helpful, it's much easier to ask for help from someone if you've helped them before.
That's so good and so simple.
Yeah.
That's so good. And if people want to find more of you online, where would you direct them to?
Just www.bitmakerlabs.com.
Awesome. Well, Craig, thank you so much for coming.
No problem.
I'm so excited to see this vision come to fruition.
Thank you.
And watching your continued success.
Cool. Thanks so much.